Hello and welcome to another podcast episode of the Exponential Europe podcast. We are a community with a cause. We want to see multiplication and reproduction become the norm in the language and behavior of the church in Europe again. My name is Jason Lim. I am your host for this podcast. In some way, I am your fellow journeyman. I don't know, journeyer is not a word. I'm a pilgrim alongside you as we travel through Europe, meeting some of these faces, meeting some of these people that make up the community. This time around, I didn't have to travel far at all. I've just stayed in town here in the beautiful city of Frankfurt, Germany. Some would argue this is the capital of Europe, but we're not going to get into that. Here we are in beautiful Frankfurt, and I'm sitting across from Markus Engel. Thanks for being here, Markus.
Thanks for inviting me.
We've known each other for almost 10 years, but sadly, the listeners have not. So let's have them catch up on not just 10 years, but 30 years of your life. You've just recently celebrated your 30th.
I will celebrate my 30th.
Oh, see, in my mind, you've already...
Maybe on the same day as the birth of our first son.
See?
So
who knows? That may be a beautiful birthday gift for you. So tell us, what do the listeners have to know about Markus the Great?
They need to know about Jason, because hopefully some of the stuff that Jason is doing, I'm doing as well. I'm a church planter in the north of Frankfurt. I'm planting actually the daughter church of multiplication out of the church that Jason planted a few years back. I'm German, married to a German wife. We're from the opposite sides of Germany.
Very different kind of Germany.
Very different kinds of
You're
Germany.
from the way down
Way
south. You're
yeah.
from the southern. You're the southern German.
Yeah, we have it's the same thing like America. We also have funny accents in the south.
Yeah. So way down south, and she's way up north.
Yeah.
You've been married.
It's 2020 so it's very easy to say. 4 years.
We were both there, so both of us struggling. Anyway, and you're expecting your first child in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Which is great. What else do we need to know about you?
I love theology. I love digging deep in theological questions, and I love the interplay of this weird church planting world where we are constantly struggling with the idea of how do we do this stuff in a world that's constantly changing. Just the interplay of thinking through some questions and then trying to live it out in the real world. And so I have a passion for that. I wanted to be a professor back in the day, and
a theology professor.
That was the goal at some point. But God clearly called me into He called me into just learning what He's doing in the worldwide church, and especially in Europe. And so I dove into church planting and wanted to see how that is, because in the way I experienced church planting in America was like, oh, you got a team, you got a big building and a pastor and everything, and then you kind of branch out. And when I met Jason, I was like, he just said I asked him what he was doing, and he said, I just meet people in Starbucks and just talk to them. And to me, that was so fascinating. It was like, there's no team yet. There was no building. There's nothing. And you just go and meet people. And that was super exciting for me. So that's how I ended up here in Frankfurt, and ended up meeting Jason. And
So you started off in the south of Germany.
Yeah.
And then you went to the US.
Yes.
For a year?
Yes.
At Moody
Bible Institute.
in Spokane.
In Spokane, Washington, yeah.
Which exists no longer.
Yes.
Since you've left, they had to close it.
It's all crumbled behind me,
But before that, no, wait, I messed up your lifespan, not lifespan. I messed up your biography. Before you went to the US, you went to Sweden.
Yeah.
With the torchbearers.
Yeah. Did a year there,
just
working on
for
buildings.
fun, like what?
It's the thing German young people do. They do a gap year after high school.
And why the torchbearers in Sweden?
Because that's a good question, but it's because I knew someone who went there and who did some stuff there, and Sweden was always fascinating for me. I've been there before, and that just sounded very interesting. We were in charge of fixing these old, red and white Swedish wooden houses and harvesting wood in the winter, and it was just.
And was that kind of what propelled you towards studying theology, or did you go there already with that in mind?
No, not at all. I went there with the intention of studying biological engineering.
Interesting.
After I got back. And this was kind of the first time where I experienced theology lived out in a community. So they had both. They had a living community where people were doing life together and struggling through hard questions and being there for one another, having daily rhythms together, while at the same time there were lectures where people would listen to the big picture of the Bible, for example, or Old Testament theology stuff. And that was, to me, so exciting so whenever I got off work, I had the opportunity to sit in those lectures, even though I wasn't a student. And that was super exciting for me because for the first time I experienced, like, you can wrestle through your faith with your mind. You don't have to shut that off. You don't have to live in two worlds. Like, you can fully engage God with your mind. And that was, to me, that was super exciting. And I had the urge then, from what I was learning, to tell that to others. Maybe in an arrogant way in the beginning a little bit, but I think that there was an honest part about that as well, where I wanted to just share that and give it forward to someone else.
Help people see the depth that there actually is.
Yes.
It's not just a shallow kind of faith that can't withstand your questioning.
And there's so much truth and so much power in the gospel to change lives and transform lives. And that then I talked to my mentor there, and he said, well, why don't you just go ahead and study now? If you want to do something else afterwards, you can still do that. But
there are seminaries in Germany, though. Yeah. So I don't know. You have a fleeing nature. Yeah. Like, I want to go to Sweden, and then I want to go to the Swedish side of America, Washington State, and like, why you would think with all the robust history of theological education that we have in Germany, that you would kind of be drawn to that more naturally. What propelled you to go beyond the pond?
Yeah. I think it was always like a mix of motives, the spirit of adventure, seeing something new, but then also the idea of, well, it's funny, now I look back much more positive on my home church where I grew up in, but in my like when I was 18, 19, I had a very negative view of my upbringing and about the churches in Germany. And because I experienced the time in Sweden was such a shaping time, and there were a lot of Americans, and some of them studied in the States. I was like, I want to get what they got. Right. And so I then thought that would be a crazy idea. And I kind of loved the idea of adventure as well. Yeah. And I never really looked into, I knew some of the universities in Germany were super liberal, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to go there. Right. And I never really looked into the other alternatives. I was like, I want to go as far away as I possibly can.
What was your most critical point about the church? Either generally the church in Germany, that's quite a broad statement, but maybe more specifically even your home church that you found kind of troubling, to put it nicely.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I think the way I tell that story has changed as well. Like, back in the day, I would say, there was no solid teaching. Yeah. There was no solid answers. There were no solid, like, thinking through these certain things. And true, maybe that was a little bit of a weak point, but now thinking back on, like, the actual experiences and relationships that were shaping me, I think the bigger problem was that I was left alone with a lot of my questions, and that wouldn't have been fixed through just teaching. Right. I know, like, when it came to youth ministry, I still have, like, vivid memories of one evening where a youth leader, we constantly had changing youth leaders, but that one youth leader, he didn't have the best, like, devotionals. He didn't have the best devotionals when we met in youth group. He was kind of, like, not too eloquent, but he invited us to his home. And he cooked for us, and we just hang out together, and he asked deep questions. And I still have, like, completely vivid memories of his house and the way people sat there. And this is almost like 15 years ago. And that, I think, was a super like that moment was so powerful, but that wasn't there so much. Like, people weren't really being invested in by others. And I do think now that that's the bigger problem. People are so caught up in programs. People are so caught up in just going through the motions. Church can become in Germany a little bit like a social club, and even in free churches that kind of went away from the original idea of, because in Germany you have this weird thing called a state church where Christian culture is so ingrained in German culture, it's almost like one thing and you can't separate it. But even in the free churches, even in the churches who kind of came together to celebrate the gospel again, even there, it very easily just becomes a social club. And church is a building, church is an event, and church is an institution that kind of needs to kept running. And so all it was like, okay, who's going to do music next week? Okay, how can we play better music in this Sunday service and so on? And I do think a lot of questions, a lot of young people are lacking that investment, just everyday relationships, where those questions that they need to wrestle through. I don't think, a lecture is helpful, a sermon is helpful, but I do think that you need those people in your life that you can speak through those things, and that you can wrestle through those things when on the streets of everyday life.
That's super fascinating. Reminds me a little bit about our first episode too. Go ahead and check that out, people. And also, it's fascinating to think that someone who, was on the trajectory to become a professor of theology, and that loves deep thinking, and it's no secret. You're far smarter than me, and you read way more books than me.
Not true. I'm interested in different things, I would say sometimes.
And so I've learned so much from you as well, but that you emphasize that, it isn't about letting go of deep teaching or deep theology, but maybe you can even go deeper in a different format rather than just kind of the upfront teaching style. Yeah. So you went to the US for 1 year.
Yep.
Now, you are smart, but you probably didn't finish in 1 year, and then for some reason you were kind of pulled back into Germany. I don't know how you would tell that story.
Yeah, that's also, I think that was one of the few moments in my life where I really clearly, heard a calling from God or experienced His speaking to me. And it was through multiple events. One, God really gave me a passion for Germany at that time. Because I was saying to God, hey, I'm open. You can send me wherever you want. Like, send me somewhere in the jungle, at the campus where I was, they would train missionary pilots, and they would go into the jungle and
Those are the real people. Man.
Yeah, and I was, one of my tutors, he was really invested in theological education in third world countries as well. And so that was something that was really speaking to me. It was like, okay, bringing, maybe training people there who maybe don't have all the resources or don't have the time to go through a long training like that, but I could train them so they could be better pastors or have, and that was kind of my passion. But then, God really gave me a passion for Germany, and it was not like, oh, I'm so excited to go back, but my heart just grieved because I felt like so much of what could be there isn't. And that was the first thing that happened. And then the second thing, one professor, he was always annoying everybody with talking about evangelism so much. And he said one thing to me, and he said, after he asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him that story, and he said, man, all these Christians, they just want to work with Christians all the time. Mm-hmm. And that hurt. That hurt, and that really, that kept bugging me. And then we had this missions conference there, and I really was sure, I'm going to meet someone, maybe an agency that's going to a third world country, wherever, and I'm going to be on a trajectory of going there maybe one day. And they also had a session on Germany, and I was there, and I really felt again, wow, my heart is grieved for that. And then I started kind of doing research a little bit more and asking around. And then people would, after a while, they would just ask me, what are you still doing here? It's so clear God wants you somewhere else and God wants you in Germany. And then through contacts of my professors there, I got in touch with Gießen School of Theology, FTH Gießen, here in Germany, close to Frankfurt. And I transferred there. After a year, and that was another wild journey.
And then you came here, and then soon after, you either had the privilege or the horror of bumping into me. I think it was another professor's living room.
Yep.
Another leader's living room.
Yep.
Talking about church planting.
Yes.
And I'm not entirely certain anymore what I was doing there. I think I was just there to hang out with people, and I shared a little bit about what I was doing, and that was 2015.
Mm-hmm. Late 2015. Yep.
And you joined our non-existing church. Mm-hmm. the church plant fairly early on in the process, and forward a couple of years, you're now planting your own church. You're about, I want to say, 3 years in.
Yeah, depending on how you count.
Right.
Because I am bivocational. I work I used to work as a barista and working in coffee for a long time. Now I'm a teacher for religion music at public primary schools. And so I've always worked at least half time or 60 to 70%. So having less time, just everything goes a little slower. And so we moved in 2021. I would say 2022 was context analysis year. 2023 is when we had our first kind of small meetings, Bible studies and things. And this year, I would say this is kind of the first full year where we had a small team, we had a small community, we're trying to do stuff. And yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your church plant.
Yeah, so we are a very young house church-based church plant in the north of Frankfurt, in one of its newest districts called Riedberg. It's in the northwest of Frankfurt. It's one of the places in Frankfurt with most young kids. So there's lots of families. It's kind of the place where people move to when they kind of had already a successful career and now they want to have kids, maybe in their mid 30s, something like that. That is how it was built back in the day, and that was like 2001. I think they started with the first section, but where we live is like 2010.
Right.
So fairly new, and also fairly wealthy. I would say like upper middle class. It's not like there's some like crazy rich people there too, but it's upper middle class and very expensive to live there. So in most families, both parents are working, and the kids they go to different schools, and then they have tons of different hobbies. So people are very busy. They're kept busy by kind of the good things in life that they want to do, but so their schedules are very full. I remember when I was in Nordweststadt, we had some people who didn't have work and who were struggling to find work, or were just have barely arrived in Germany, learning German, and those people were available. So you constantly had the opportunity to meet them, and it's very different on Riedberg. And there is a science campus as well from the university. It's kind of like those two worlds never mix. The students just travel there to go to lectures, and then like twice a day you see these, like I think it's 3,000 students per day who are on that campus.
Wow.
But they're only there for that short time of the lectures. There's a nice park around. In the summer, like you barely ever see people hanging out there.
It's not like a campus, like kind of like the other one more downtown where people kind of hang out.
It's really people just travel there to have their lectures, maybe study a little bit in the library, and then they travel back to the hip places of town.
A lot more expensive for students to even live there, to even find a place. Yeah.
Yep. And those who do, they come from all across Frankfurt, and maybe sometimes even around Frankfurt.
Right.
It's just the living situation here is so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apartment prices are steep.
Yep.
So you have, I want to say, 3 house churches now. Yep. They're quite diverse.
Yes.
You have a kind of large Chinese community as well. How did that happen?
There is, it's one of the largest Chinese communities, I think, in all of Hessen. That is on
Really?
Yeah.
In this whole state?
Yeah, I think so.
Wow.
It's one of the, and then people, some families even just move here so that their kids can go to school in the district. They have a very kind of well-known, it's a public school, but it's bilingual, and it's quite well renowned. And so a lot of families come from China, and then maybe the husband is working in China, and the mom and the children are living here. And because they move where other Chinese live as well, because it's a more tight-knit community, and they want to help each other out. And so once you have a certain base established, a lot of the firms that real estate firms, a lot of them are owned by Chinese people, and it's always easier because they speak the language. And so that's how you have just naturally more people in one community from one culture. And we got to know a few of them, and some of them were even looking for a church or a local community there on Riedberg, and we got connected with them through the Chinese church here in Frankfurt, which has people coming from all across almost the state of Hessen. And it's always been a collaborative effort. And they said like, hey, we have some people here, they really are looking for a Bible study in a community here in this district. And they connected us. And that's how we got connected to them. And then we are just meeting new Chinese people. Many of them don't know Jesus yet. currently one of the house churches is an Alpha course in Chinese. It's a Chinese-speaking house church, and half of the people there aren't Christians yet. And that's really exciting for me. And then
you've already had some baptisms, and people have come to faith,
Yes.
and people are walking, taking steps in their journey with Christ, which is exciting.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about multiplication and how you've experienced it as kind of planting a church out of a mother church, and also now in the process of thinking about, how do we also become our own mother church to plant? Because I think that's always been your vision for your church plant, that there will be churches planted out of it as well.
Yep.
What was it like to and you can speak frankly, it's just us here. Yeah, you can be honest. What was it like planting out of a mother church as a multiplication? Because I think in the exponential world, we can sometimes throw around the words church planting and church multiplication almost what's the word?
Synonymously?
Yeah, thank you. Synonymously, which I don't think that's always the way they're understood. Like most church planting, at least the way I've experienced it, is not really multiplication. Like it's just kind of I start on my own somewhere. At least that's almost how we started. Although we were involved in church plants before and we came out of that, but it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was a multiplication out of that church. But how did you experience it?
I don't think I would have even thought about church planting if it wasn't for multiplication. Like if there weren't other people in the church plant, you and others, encouraging us to embark on that crazy journey, we weren't sure. Like it wasn't like I was here always like, oh, this is what I'm wanting to do. I was open to be sent where God wants me here in Germany, and you guys encouraged me to kind of ask that question. Hey, would you be open to do that? Sure, I did an assessment and all these certain things, but I think if it wouldn't have been for that, the opportunity and the investment from you guys, I don't think I've ever would have even come close to thinking about doing something like that.
Makes you wonder how many people in our churches, how many potential church planters we have that aren't thinking about it because no one's even...
I didn't see myself, and I still don't see myself as the church planter. I don't think I fit that. I'm not...
Whatever that is.
But, I would have never thought about it, like even doing it, if it wouldn't have been for multiplication. And the second thing is, it is very healthy, I think, to be on a journey with others together. It's like when I was in university, we still had the image of the church planters, kind of like this lone wolf. You have to go against everybody and like do your own thing. And I think
like
now in this
down somewhere, and then it's just you in the woods.
Now in this world, I don't think that works. Maybe sometimes, yes, for some people, but I also don't see that as. Yeah, I don't know. It's just for me. It was always. It seems so much easier to do it in a multiplicational way because you allowed us and you even told us to take other people along, and so we didn't leave alone. We went as two families in the beginning, and then a third person came who was also then involved at Mosaic Nordwest, so the mother church, and we took them along and kind of planted our first house church in the new district as kind of the core of the new church that we were planting. And it's much more natural. You think, like multiplication sometimes can seem as this pressure thing where it's like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this. And yeah, that's true. But in the same time, it's also so much easier because once it becomes a culture and a natural thing, it's like you don't even think about it. This is just normal that happens. And so we saw that already in the mother church with house churches multiplying and then having to split, it's always that feeling of having to split from someone. But it's like you're starting something new. And so we already knew that coming out of it. So a certain part of the culture was already established, which was, I think, really helpful for us in the beginning. Also to think about church not as an institution, not as just like starting an event, a regular Sunday morning event, but starting a community and starting people doing life together in everyday life. And so I think that identity was already inside of us, and that made it a lot easier to plant in that way without a lot of the other pressures. Sure, there was financial support in the beginning as well, which is always helpful. Not a ton. Like, you guys couldn't have sent us out as like fully funded. That doesn't work. Not for a small church, but a little bit. I think it was like a mini job in the beginning, which is a quite substantial thing, and that was really helpful for us. But also just to have the constant involvement and people knowing us, and we could ask people, hey, how do you do this? My sister, she does kids ministry in Jason's church, and so I constantly ask her, is like, how do you do things in there? Like, have you had this problem? Have you had this situation? Like, what do you do about it? And so she came to one of our house church nights and kind of helped out and gave me feedback on like, oh, you could do this, you could maybe try that. And that to me was super helpful. Sure, I could talk to some like childcare expert somewhere else, but she's just down the road,
Right.
So it's just so much easier kind of to be thinking about it together.
Yeah, I think, and we'll dive into some misconceptions of multiplication. But I think what you're saying is really key for people to understand, that I think multiplication enables church planting to happen in a more, like there's more of a safety net, it feels, and more support.
Yes.
And as we've communicated to you and to the other church planters as well, is that, if this thing fails, and every church plant is always kind of a trial and error, and you see where it goes, it's kind of an adventure.
Yep.
There's always something to come back to nearby.
Yep.
There's the ongoing support in prayer. Sometimes you guys would still come in the beginning to the service just to have a place to worship with others. And it was, we never approached all of you and be like, oh, join our church. Like, we know you were just there to worship with us. As long as you needed that, as long as that needed to be a space, and the ongoing relationship of, also on our side of it, I think it was helpful to keep planting churches, because it reminds us of like why we exist as a church, why are we doing this, why would we let go like the best people, why are we sending the best people away? Oh, that's right, it's about his kingdom, and it's about the expansion, it's about seeing his kingdom grow, but also the ongoing responsibility that we feel like this is our daughter church. Like, I always make the analogy of like the daughter moves out of the house because she's old enough now, but then you kind of still keep the room just in case she comes back, and she can come back on the weekends and do her laundry. And if she once the daughter leaves the home, it's not like, oh, she's no longer our family. She still is. But I think we have a very static understanding of family. Although even though we'll say church is family, but actually that's a very multiplicative term when we say that. So let's talk about some misconceptions. What would you say are some key misconceptions of multiplication?
I think one is like, oh, you can do that once you've got it all figured out. That's like one of the big ones I hear is like, okay, like once you're safely established, once everything is running well, then you can think about maybe like a luxury. So it's like the luxury of multiplication.
The luxury, that's good.
Is like one of the biggest misconceptions, because honestly, like I would say it's the other way around. It's like it's necessary to be doing it. Otherwise, like there wouldn't have been. There have been other ideas of church planting in this district where I was, and that was a lot of like building an event, and that didn't work. It wasn't sustainable. It didn't last a long time, and so I think it's a part of the journey to be thinking about the future, and it's just normal. Like when that's the culture that you've known, multiplication isn't a luxury. It's ingrained in our whole DNA of the church. It's like we don't have a building. We don't have a thing that we rent, so we worship in living rooms, and we're already thinking about, okay, what does that mean? Okay, once we have like 4 house churches already now, like if everybody would come on a Sunday, the living rooms would be pretty full, and so we're thinking about, okay, maybe the better thing is, rather than to rent a big building, which there are none to rent, and then maybe moving out to a different district, hey, let's just start a second Sunday service, and it's because that DNA is so ingrained, it's no longer a luxury or a pressure to say, okay, eventually you have to get there. but it's something you constantly are doing. You think about, okay, who could be the next leader of another house church? Who could be, and then maybe out of a house church, who could we send out to do what we're doing somewhere else, or who could we bring in to learn that idea of thinking about church and community, who we then could send out later as well. And so I do think if we think multiplication is a luxury, we will never get to it. And if we try, it's much harder. And I would say it's not a luxury. It's the DNA and the basis of what we are as the church.
Oh, that's really good. I mean, I always tell people like our church is like the perfect example, the counterexample. Like we don't have a building either. We don't even have the finances to to pay someone full time as a pastor. We don't have a lot of people. We're like maybe around 60 people, so we're a small church. Although we're like, I would say average for our city, but like in terms of what people might understand as like a normal sized church, we're probably small with 60 people. Yeah, so we're small, we're young, we're not, I wouldn't say like, yeah, I think the idea of that multiplication happens out of the surplus of what you have. Like, oh, we just have so much money lying around, we don't know what to do with it. Oh, we could maybe plant a church, like, or out of the surplus of leadership that we have. Like, oh, we've got so many people, they're kind of standing around bored, we don't have enough things for them to do. Maybe we send them out and then like church planting becomes something to kind of keep them busy or give them something. But no, it's always been painful, financially and the resource of people that we give away. And that's been but it's always been an intentional kind of pain you go through like birth. It's like we want this pain so that the baby is born. We want to have this birth because we want to see it furthered.
It's not like it's easy in the sense it doesn't, or it just naturally happens. But in a sense, like when cells multiply, there is a process.
Here comes the bioengineer.
I know that there's a process of where that is, parts of that have to be deconstructed and then reconstructed. It takes energy, it takes resources, it's work. It's a lot of work, but it's just, if it's in the DNA, it's gonna happen.
Right.
And like growing pains, they're gonna happen because it's normal, and also it can, like, just because it hurts is not a sign, oh, this won't work.
Right.
And I think for us that was really, I don't think we would exist if
that's an interesting point. Would you say like an avoidance of pain, which is a Western problem, avoidance of pain, or maybe to turn it around and it's like seeking kind of a comfortable path and an easy path. Is that what keeps us from multiplying? Would you say that's part of the reason why, like if churches are not willing to feel pain, then multiplication will probably not happen?
Yeah, and I yes, definitely. And I would say even further on, even in like if we think about leadership multiplicationally, there's a lot of pain involved in that as well. And in the beginning, if we try to avoid that, multiplication becomes harder and harder and harder. And then in the future, sustainability becomes harder and harder and harder.
Unpack that. That's an interesting.
Like I'm a person. I love to do stuff. Like I can wing stuff. Jason's a person like that as well. He can just wing.
We're just
stuff.
wingers.
Jason can like show up somewhere and I don't know. Maybe Jason does invest a lot of time. Don't hear me wrong. But sometimes Jason
unprepared to everything.
No, that's not true. But sometimes like your life has been crazy. Your week has been super full. You didn't have time to do anything, and you just show up and you just do the thing.
Yeah.
If you take someone along and have them do it, no way.
Right.
You would have to invest a lot more time to take them along. If you want the outcome to be the same, it's a lot more work to get someone to the same point of to the same stage of where you are now through years and years of experience and just doing it a bunch of times, right? And so I noticed that in my leadership a lot, where it's like, oh, it's so much easier. I could just do that, and then you kind of like get into that habit of avoiding that pain of taking someone along and like giving something out of the hand and maybe having to show up and for support to support the other person, which is a lot more work than just doing it yourself in the beginning. But you limit yourself if you don't. So if you don't allow that pain to happen, your limit is a lot lower where you could go where it would be if you would be thinking and doing it multiplicational, which does hurt.
Right.
And the same thing is true for a church as well.
To make it something habitual.
Yeah.
And I think just recently someone said that if a church hasn't planted another church in 20 years, it's very, very, very hard for them to start that going again. Because things have just been established in a way where multiplication has not been part of it. And so suddenly it becomes a very kind of unnatural feeling thing.
And it is, I understand it, because it's like, especially if you think about church as an institution or as an event, like keeping an event going is a lot of work. And sometimes new people coming in is actually a distraction. If that is your goal, to just keep something going, sometimes new people is not helpful. It's actually harmful. Because then you have to teach them how to do the same things. Maybe they're not reliable. And so if you have a small team of people who are committed, who just do the things, you can keep doing it for 20 years.
Right.
Some churches, that's what they do.
Right.
They keep an event going for 20 years. Right. But there is almost no new people coming in because there's no space.
Right.
And sure, that does get exhausting after a while as well, but it's a much... a lot of the dangerous diseases are the ones that you don't feel terrible pain, but it's like this slow growing tumor, which eventually will kill you, but you're not going to feel it in the beginning.
Wow.
And going against it, like having it cut out, that hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts a lot more than letting it grow for another 2 months. I don't know, maybe bad analogy, but...
No. I'm following, I'm tracking.
So in a sense, I feel like I totally understand it, that it feels like when this is what you think about churches doing this event and doing these certain things, it feels much easier to just think in addition and to just add people to what you're already doing. But it doesn't have the same potential for growth than multiplicational growth has. It's is a linear curve, maybe if you're really lucky, and then the other one is an exponential curve, which if it happens. But of course, like there's the other side as well. That it is a lot harder to build community with few people and to have it thriving, because in the beginning the load is going to be on very few people. And so I would say, if multiplication is a thing, to be sent out as a larger team, or like as a part of the team, it's like, when a cell multiplies, it's almost like a half split, like the cell splits almost like in the middle. And I do feel like there's a balance there in the sense to say, yes, to be thinking multiplicational, but to also know, like, if we wouldn't have had that safety rope of our mother church close by, I think it would have been wiser to start with a bigger group, because you can rely on each other much easier. So there is a balance, but when you think, I need more people first until we can do this, at a certain point, it becomes very dangerous, because then it's no longer part of your DNA. So I would say, allow the growing pains, but then also think, okay, how many people do I need? Don't go at it alone. Maybe take 2-3 families along, and it'll still hurt. It'll still be difficult, but you have a bigger base to start with. So,
what's another misconception you see?
I mean, what you often hear is like, oh, maybe that works in your context, but not in the other contexts. We're just church. For us, it's just different. And that, to me, is fascinating. Or when people say, maybe that's a new, like, multiplication is a fad, like it's this new thing that's been come along. And I love the history of the church, and I love reading the church fathers. And but I think the discovery of multiplication was not a discovery, but it was a rediscovery. The question is, how far do you go back? Because it was ingrained and still is ingrained in the DNA of the church in places where the church is illegal. I think with Constantine and the Christianity becoming legal, we dove into this new paradigm where it was more institutionalized, but it's not like this is the paradigm in which the church was born. That paradigm came later. And when we look at other places, like not China nowadays, but maybe China 20 years ago or 30, 40 years ago, that still is the normal way the church is being built. And so I would encourage people to say, to not look at it like something is, okay, maybe this is this new style or this new method, you know, but it's something that's so deeply ingrained into who we are as Christians and into the calling as Christians. You know, all of that is multiplicational and outworking. Jesus sending out the 70, Jesus then like in the Missionsbefehl, I forgot.
The Great Commission.
The Great Commission. It's like Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the world. Like it starts small at one place, but multiplication then spreads it outward. And so I would suggest to people to say, to maybe just trust that idea, that identity still is there in who we are as followers of Jesus, and that it is able to work in different contexts, even though it might look different.
Right.
You know, we might not expect, like we might not see an exponential growth like we did in China here in Germany, because it's a different culture. We still have these two paradigms that kind of battle each other sometimes, and it won't look the same maybe, but that doesn't mean that this paradigm is completely ill-fitted to our context.
Yeah, I think those two misconceptions are also related, right?
Yeah.
So the idea that multiplication is a strategy and not like what you say, like an identity, a question of identity, is if we see it as a strategy, we will always try to add it.
Yeah.
And I think this is where people feel it's a luxury, because it's like they see everything that they're doing in the church, and the list of programs is long, and all these things that they have to retain and attain and maintain. And it's like now adding a whole multiplication thing to it, like now adding, training people up and then giving them away without that crumbling what we've built. And I think that's the inner tension that people feel. Whereas if it becomes an identity and multiplication isn't just something that we do, but it's part of who we are, then the pain doesn't go away. Like just recently, there's people that are wanting to go with our third daughter church now. People that we had hoped we could build up as leaders for ourselves, right? So you see these potential people, and you're like, man, these are going to be good. Let's like invest in them. And then suddenly they're like, you know what? We're thinking about like joining the third daughter church and helping them out. There's a pain. There's an obvious pain there. And then there's a meeting I wasn't a part of because they don't need me. I just heard about this. So they were talking about this couple, and they said, we think, quite honestly, they would do well to stay within our context and learn a little bit more before they go, so that they're more useful to the daughter church. But then discussions started around, like, how long do they stay, right? And then there was like 1 year, and then someone's like, I think they need 2 years. And then a young leader who she doesn't talk up much, but at the end of the meeting, she kind of spoke up and said, I don't think if people want to go, which is what we want, we want that to be part of who we are. We shouldn't hold them back longer than necessary. So let's just do 1 year and then let them go, because that's who we want to be. And that was very strong, right?
Wow.
For this person to say that. And I think you run into that, but it doesn't become a question of like, oh, this is the goal we set. No, this is who we want to be. This is what we want to be like. Like going back to your analogy of habits, right? And I'm going through the book very slowly, Atomic Habits, and which is not a Christian book. He's just talking about how to create habits in your life. And he says the most important piece is you start with identity. You don't start with, I want to lose this much weight with a goal. He says you never rise to the height of your goals. You always fall to the level of your systems, like to the habits you are in. So he says, don't set the goal of I want to lose this much weight, but rather set the goal of an identity. I want to be a healthy person. And then your habits will flow out of that. Because what happens when you've lost that weight? Then you just go back to how you've lived before, because you've reached your goal. And so multiplication shouldn't be we want to plant this many churches. That's a healthy and that's not a bad goal to have. But at the end of the day, it becomes a question of what kind of church do we want to be? What kind of leader do we want to be? What kind of disciple do we want to be? Well, I want to be a disciple that helps others make disciples. I want to be a leader that creates space for others to be to rise up in their leadership and create space for others again. I want to be a church that plants more church. That's who we want to be. And then the question of multiplication doesn't become a strategic question. It becomes a question of, hey, if that's who we want to be, then that's why this and this follows, right? So I think those are really, really helpful points. Lastly, as you're thinking about, okay, now we want to see our church also plant other churches, what are you kind of bumping into as being like the most most challenging parts about multiplication within kind of from the second to the third generation?
Two things. One is, when is a church plant a church plant? Like, there's still a lot of the old paradigms, because still a lot of our denominations also work that way. Is like you need to build, like, there's so much organization around certain things. Like, example, like if one person in our house church moves to a different district, starts a house church there, takes some people along, finds other people, like, is this a new church plant or is it not? And that is one question. It's like, how low key can we think about church for it to be a church plant? How do we measure that?
Right.
And are there maybe other ways that we can think about that? And then the second, because that, in the sense that I see as possible and normal, in a sense, when we think about multiplicational house churches, it would be normal to send someone out to do the same thing in a different district. And we're building up leaders for that, so that is not the issue. I feel very often, because the way we think about the way we think about church is still this like very large thing, this very large organizational thing, and then you need to think about someone, okay, with theological education, and you need someone to do that as well. And so, but then to bring that person in and train them in the new paradigm is very difficult, because it just takes a while to be really ingrained in that culture to get a grasp. And so it's kind of the same problem, but I would say it's one problem, but it's two parts of the same medal. It's like, if you do it low key, there's enough people to do it, but then there's other struggles. It's like, how do you structure that? Is that a new church plan? What do they need? Like, when is it just like another location, like, or then if you think about it more in like the larger, older sense of like, you start this whole new thing, then you're thinking about, okay, how do I find people who are trained to do that? Because a lot of the people who come from, like, when I came from university, I didn't learn to do what I'm doing now. Like, I learned to hold sermons and which was very helpful when I had to do a funeral the other week. I went to university to study that. So that I learned. But here, like, everyday life, I didn't learn. And so, like, how do you find people? How do you convince people that this is already a church plant who you are training, and you maybe move to a different district and say, just go for it, and then you're a church planter? And the other part of the medal is, but then how do you find people who wanting to work in the church world and who go to your university for that? How do you get them into this paradigm so that they learn these skills that you need, who are so different to the things that they're taught very often? So that, I would say, is one challenge. Yeah.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you. Everyone, you've heard it here. The student has become the master.
No.
I appreciate it.
Not at all.
Thanks for being part of what makes Frankfurt great.
Thanks for letting me be a part of it.